Welcome to Semcast. I'm Dale Meyer, president of Concordia Seminary. When you read your Bible, do you ever wonder where it came from? When you get into discussions about what the Bible really means, did you ever hear anyone say, oh, it's been translated so many times, nobody really knows what the Bible is truly saying? Well, we have with us today someone who can answer those questions and direct us to a great resource for Bible study and also for our reassurance that when we read the Bible, we are reading what God is actually communicating to us through His Word. I want to introduce to you Dr. Phil Towner. Dr. Towner is the Dean of the NIDA Institute of the American Bible Society, headquartered on Broadway in New York City. Phil, welcome.
Thank you, Dale.
The official name of the NIDA Society is?
The NIDA Institute for Biblical Scholarship, named after Eugene Nida, who in a way is my predecessor some, 4 or 5 decades earlier. He worked out of the American Bible Society and brought to the world of Bible translation a very important theory which was first called dynamic equivalence, later came to be called functional equivalence, and has led to the whole trend of translation around the world, which we call, I suppose more popularly, common language translation.
Okay, so you've just given us a lot of information. Eugene Nida is a biblical scholar.
And a linguist.
And a linguist, meaning?
Meaning his main field of study was linguistics.
Okay, and then functional equivalency means, let's say that I'm translating a text.
All right.
Okay, a biblical text. 1 Peter, for example, which I happen to be teaching right now. There's word A, B, C, and D, and so on. And we think of translation as taking A and putting it into an English A, B from Greek and putting it into Greek. And sometimes that comes out pretty wooden and doesn't read right. Now, how does functional equivalency relate to that, compared to that wooden word for word?
Actually, the kind of word for word translation approach you were describing, we would call formal equivalence, where there is an attempt to match, for instance, an English word with the Greek word or an English word with the Hebrew word. But in fact, that doesn't work, at least not for most languages. Languages have to be very closely cognate for that kind of a translation approach to work effectively.
You mean by closely cognate, the two languages have to be very similar in their structure and thought patterns and so on? Right,
to be closely related, linked, maybe the same group of people, but on one side of the mountain they speak this way, on the other side of the mountain slightly another way. And what Eugene Nida did was begin to focus on the target or the recipients of the translation. He focused on meaning and understood that very often, well, of course, concepts and words in Hebrew or Greek could not come straight across into their language. And so dynamic or functional equivalence sought to find those ways and patterns of speaking in the target language which would communicate the meaning. The meaning was this, in Eugene Nida's concept, this kind of kernel that could pass between cultures.
Let me ask you then, maybe this is an extreme example, but I've heard it, and you're certainly familiar with it. There are cultures in which Jesus' words, I am the good shepherd, make no sense. They don't know what a shepherd is.
Right.
Okay, according to this functional or dynamic equivalency, instead of talking about a shepherd, it would be Jesus saying, I am
something else, which in that particular culture and language served the same purpose. Some sort of person or functionary in the culture, if not a shepherd, something else, maybe a cowboy, I don't know what, which carried out a similar kind of function and therefore would express the same kind of meaning of protection and all the rest.
So we might wonder now, can we actually make that kind of a change in translation? But there are many less glaring changes that a functional translation will make. And I don't know if you can think of one off the top of your head or if I can, but simple things that we wouldn't notice when we were reading along in that kind of translation. But in fact, what the translator has been doing is getting the thought into our heads in a way that we can understand.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right. And in some cases, if we just consider English translations, there are many that some of us grew up with. The RSV, of course before that, the King James Version, and through these very popular versions, which became the church Bibles, in the Catholic, in the mainline Protestant, in the evangelical churches, through these translations, a kind of Christian vocabulary develops. But as it's happened since especially the 70s, 80s onwards, we have a whole segment of an American audience that does not understand that kind of church language.
Okay, so I grew up and had to memorize a lot of King James passages, right. And the RSV was coming in new then. I was born much before my time. Those are formal equivalencies, correct? Formal
closer to formal, yes.
Closer to it. And then there was, the first one that pops into my head was when I was a young pastor teaching confirmation class, and I discovered that the young people in this confirmation instruction class really liked today's English version. Can you tell me anything about that?
Well, the Today's English Version is one of the American Bible Society proprietary translations.
No kidding?
Yes,
Did
indeed.
I just stumble onto that?
That's right.
Did I just stumble on? So that the American Bible Society made that translation, Today's English Version, TEV, or the Good News. It's
Good News is what it's,
Good News
I think,
for Modern Man.
Officially. Well, Good News for Modern Man, we refer to it now as a Good News translation. It is, in fact, one of the most popular and successful common language translations. It was designed, as the project was put together, as a translation that would reach people who had learned English as a second language. So, really, by definition, the mission strategy had to be one in which the message of the Scriptures was delivered in a more simple and certainly, if you like, de-jargonized English language.
And this was an American Bible Society
That's right.
production. Now, when we walked down here into the studio, we went by Concordia Seminary Center for Hispanic Studies and stuck our head in, and I introduced you to to Marcus Kempf. Marcus Kempf, a lifelong missionary in South America. And do you remember what Bible he had there?
Yes, hablo hoy. It is essentially the common language Spanish, which would have been, in fact, is a United Bible Society's project, but had the same goal in mind. Common language delivery of the Spanish Bible for a Spanish-speaking audience.
Okay, has the American Bible Society and the Knight Institute participated in other readable translations?
More recently, the contemporary English version was produced, and now we have also a revised version of that called the CEV2. The same basic approach that had its beginnings, I think, as a children's Bible. But as the project developed, I think the originators of the project decided there was a broader audience, so probably they heightened the level of language slightly, but still a common language delivery.
Okay. Now, people say that, the Bible's been translated so many times, we don't know what it really means. I said that in the opening. Could you talk about, well, first of all, do we know what most of the texts, at least, actually are saying, what God is communicating through that? And then secondly, could you talk about original texts and why you especially at the Knight Institute, work with the original text, the Greek and the Hebrew and some Aramaic?
Let's see if I can go back to the first
question. The first one was, can we know what the Bible is actually saying?
Well, there will always be certain texts that are problematic, and in the Hebrew there are certain words which, since we do not have verification of the meaning we suspect in the Hebrew Bible because we can't find contemporary literature in the classical Hebrew that used it to verify it. So,
would an example of that be when we get into the Psalms and every once in a while this word Selah pops up?
something like that, or you have other places where in an English translation you'll find a footnote saying the Hebrew word or meaning is uncertain. So the attempt has been made through studies of the rabbinic writings and their commentary on that particular problem, through the Dead Sea Scrolls, which shed some light. The attempt is made to zero in on the meaning. And so I would draw back to your original question and say I'm sure that we have a reasonably good understanding of the original sense of the Scriptures, put it in the high 90%.
You mentioned that, well, that's good. And I've also been told, and you can react to this, that when it comes to the major doctrines of the Christian church, none of these textual uncertainties, the 10% or less, affect the major teachings of the Bible.
That's right, those which would be reflected in the traditional creeds going back to the 4th and 5th centuries and then taught through the centuries of the church.
Now you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I think we've all heard the name Dead Sea Scrolls. These were some scrolls discovered near the Dead Sea in 1947. Why are they so important? Why don't we just go to the library, and NIDA has a great library, why don't we just go to the library and look at the manuscript that St. Paul wrote?
Well, St. Paul didn't write Hebrew. He wrote Greek and New Testament.
Okay, well then let's go to Jeremiah, or Isaiah, or one of those guys. You're right, you got me.
Okay, no, I did, and that was good. I appreciate that. But I would say, Dale, that, well, first of all, I have to be sure that I do not claim to be a specialist in the Hebrew text. But my understanding of the Dead Sea Scrolls and what they have done for our study of the Old Testament Scriptures especially is that they have helped us to verify the text, which before that time we only had from the 6th, 7th, or 8th century A.D., which we call the Masoretic text. In and through these texts which are pre-Christian, we can see that the basis for textual decisions and for the base text chosen for the Old Testament have been pretty good, and in some cases we've been able to improve on it, to verify, to fill in some of those gaps in our understanding of the Hebrew
In other words, we do not have
the originals.
The originals.
Absolutely,
But I think they call the autographs.
The autographs are, can I say, an interesting concept. They must have been there, but we don't have access to them.
We don't have them. So that's why the discovery of, like, the Dead Sea Scrolls for the Old Testament and other discoveries are really significant, because it gets us back to the text that we have received. And when you match it up, I think, did you say 90%, roughly?
We're up there somewhere. And actually, I am referring probably to New Testament textual criticism. I think textual critics would argue we have been able to recreate, if you like, the what you call the original text, or the earliest recoverable text, to a high 90%.
Yeah, that's great. Now you mentioned New Testament textual criticism. You're a New Testament man. Tell us a little bit about yourself. This is the expose part, Phil, of the Semcast. We're going to find out about this guy. Who is this guy?
I am also not a textual critic, which is a specific discipline within biblical studies.
And we have one of those on our faculty, Dr. Jeffrey Kloa.
That's right.
He's great. But go ahead and tell us about yourself.
I am a specialist in the Pauline letters. I think in my teaching career, of course, had to cover the whole thing. But my doctoral research and most of my writing since that time has been surrounding either those three problematic Pauline letters, the letters to Timothy and Titus, working now in 2 Corinthians, which in terms of authorship is not problematic, but in terms of composition is very complicated. Mm-hmm. Continue to work in my own field as I have the time, both teaching and writing, but I've also enjoyed in the last 10 or 15 years especially venturing out into the world of translation studies because of the work I did with the United Bible Societies and now do with the ABS.
Well, I've seen your resume, and it's impressive. There are a lot of trees that gave their lives so that all of your writings and positions could be put into print. Tell us about the jobs you've held before you came to the Knight Institute.
Before I came to the Knight Institute, I worked for the United Bible Societies, which is a global fellowship of national Bible societies to which the ABS belongs. Right now I think there are about 145 national entities. I worked for the global service organization of the United Bible Societies directing the translation program. Now, that was largely a kind of leadership management role, but I was able to keep my hand in both translation and biblical studies, and worked with a team of about 70 or 80 PhDs, women and men around the world who were engaged in the field in Bible translation, helping them to think through strategy and priorities. Also worked to help the UBS develop its scholarly tools. A Greek New Testament, for instance.
Which is used often on the Concordia Seminary campus. All our students have to learn Greek.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
The UBS text is common.
The UBS Greek New Testament was actually the brainchild of Eugene Nida as well. He worked carefully to, I think, actually initially bring a scholar out of East Germany in the old communist days to have a better situation in West Germany to do his work. He is responsible, this would be Kurt Alland, was responsible for the ongoing work of the scholarly New Testament text known as Nestle Aland, which now is managed and produced by the German Bible Society in cooperation with the Münster Institute for Textual Research. But Gene Nida's vision was to have that same academic text with a scholarly, a textual apparatus at the bottom of the page which discussed the kinds of texts and decisions and options that would be of most use to translators.
Well, and as I say, it's very common on the campus here at Concordia Seminary. To wrap up our interview, let's shift from the Knight Institute. The Knight Institute is part of the American Bible Society.
That's right.
You said the American Bible Society is one of, what, the 140 some?
145 or
regional,
maybe even more.
Okay, give or take. National Bible Societies. Tell us, briefly about the American Bible Society. Did this thing just start with NIDA? How far back does it go? What's it doing?
It goes back to 1816.
1816.
That's right. And some of the early officers in the ABS are also, I think, found on the Declaration of Independence and the early documents that set the stage for the launch of the United States. The commitment back then, the same commitment shared today by the United Bible Societies and I think by all national Bible societies, is to ensure that the scriptures are available in languages that can be understood at prices that can be afforded.
And there's a very interesting thing that makes the work of the American Bible Society so, I think, appealing, is that you do not take doctrinal positions as the ABS, the American Bible Society. You simply promote the Bible.
That's right.
The Bible, it's referred to as the Bible cause.
That's
right. And
right.
you don't get into these legitimate disagreements over doctrines. I mean, we're not putting that down, but your job is just to get the Bible out there, and wherever the Bible is present, the Word of God is present, the Spirit of God is present.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it goes back to the founding. Anything else that you'd like to say to our viewers on Semcast about the American Bible Society or the Knight Institute?
Well, let's take the American Bible Society. We do have the same mission, the same remit, if you like, to ensure that each generation and various groups within the culture that make up the United States have scriptures in formats that are relevant, in media that are relevant, and so forth. And the Knight Institute is the unit within the American Bible Society that would would ensure the high scholarly standards of the product. You just mentioned this, what I would call our commitment to a kind of centrist or mainline position on matters doctrinal, so that we can reach the broadest segment of the church.
Yeah, and the various faith traditions are able to use American Bible Society products very well.
right.
Like I said when I was teaching confirmation class, that Good News for Modern Man, the TEV, was wonderful. And there was a New Testament edition that had photographs, beautiful photographs of life in Israel. And that was a great teaching device. I want to thank you for being with us, Dr. Phil Towner, Dean of the NIDA Institute. What's the rest of it?
For biblical scholarship.
For biblical scholarship, a scholar himself who has a real heart for getting this word out upon which our faith depends, upon which the forward mission of the church and our Lord Jesus Christ depends. You can find out more about Concordia Seminary offerings by going to our website, www.csl.edu. And then when you get to csl.edu, the page comes up, you can go to iTunes and see some of our other offerings, classes, lectures, presentations, and some SEMcast discussions just like this one. So thanks for being with us today, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.